Hey everyone, welcome back to WordCamp Clarita. Next up is Mark Uraine. Mark is the design director at Automatic and the design lead of Guttenberg Phase 2. And he's going to be talking about how Guttenberg started, how it's evolving, and how it's disrupting WordPress. So Mark, take it away.
Howdy, everyone. It's so good to be here today. Thank you so much for attending WordCamp Santa Clarita online. I wish we could all be there in person together, but despite the circumstances, I think the WordCamp is doing a wonderful job at hosting this online for everyone and giving us an opportunity to be together. Today, I'm going to talk about disruptive innovation and with Gutenberg and WordPress. As noted, my name is Mark Uraine. I am a design director. I'm a full-time contributor to WordPress with my focus on Gutenberg. And so I really enjoy this topic. And basically that means in my role, that means I do a lot of communication. So I communicate the strategic vision into tactical action items and communicate that to everyone else or to others who are interested or who need to partake in the project. I help to ensure that the project is moving forward, all within the boundaries of ethical communication. So that means we try to make sure that all decisions are public and include everybody on a global scale so that everyone has an opportunity to speak up, share their concerns, and give us feedback in ways that maybe we haven't thought through fully. It also means that our duty of care extends to everybody involved in the WordPress project and how we can make sure that any decisions that are made in Gutenberg and affecting WordPress are ultimately for the benefit of everybody partaking in the project and the software and the open source project altogether. So a lot of that, having to do a lot of that means I pay attention to a lot of Gutenberg feedback. So if you've been watching any of the feedback on Twitter or some of the other social networks, you'll see back in 5.2, there was some very specific Gutenberg feedback. This is a thing that we see on the releases. When 5.3 came out, we had some more Gutenberg feedback. However, with 5.4, which just released in at the end of March, it took a turn a little bit, and people found something else to complain about rather than Gutenberg kind of took a seat along the sidelines there. So what this means, though, is that when there's a feeling of uncertainty or a little antagonistic feelings towards something that's being changed in the software, a lot of times that has to do with something called disruptive innovation and how that's all happening in WordPress right now, which you can almost say disruptive innovation is kind of like a superpower, if you will. We can take this disruptive innovation and use it for evil, or we can use it for good. And of course, being part of the WordPress community, we want to use it for good, and we want to do something that is really going to help the web stay open. It's going to help democratize publishing and provide the tools that people need to continue forward in their projects and on their websites. So disruptive innovation was a term kind of coined by Clayton Christensen a while back. And on his website, he defines it and gives it a couple attributes that I want to talk about that I think pertain directly to Gutenberg. One of which being that this new product or innovation may not appear as attractive as existing solutions. I think we can pretty much all agree that when Gutenberg was merged into Core, there wasn't a lot of happiness around that happening, and it wasn't the most attractive solution out there. It has since progressed a long ways, and we're in phase 2 right now. So it's improved a lot. It's being tightened up, and the quality of Gutenberg has really shown through. And we're seeing people who were initially in opposition to Gutenberg coming out lately and saying, wow, this is a great software and it's changed so much and made their workflows so much easier. Another attribute that Clayton Christensen talks about disruptive innovation, he says that this innovation allows for a new population of consumers to come in. And I'll get more into that a little bit later as we talk about how that's happening. So to kind of solidify this concept of disruptive innovation, I have a few, just a couple slides about kind of how disruptive innovation has happened through history. Some things that we're all familiar with, how personal computers have disrupted the mainframe computers. Cellular phones have disrupted fixed line telephony. Free online courses have disrupted four-year colleges as being this gateway of knowledge, or this gatekeeper of knowledge, right? The online courses now allow knowledge to be spread so much more easily throughout the internet. There are actual companies that have disrupted industries in our lifetime. We've seen Airbnb disrupt the hotel industry. Uber and Lyft are disrupting the taxi service. Amazon has disrupted the brick and mortar retail. And of course, Netflix has disrupted video rental services. All these are companies that we're familiar with. We can identify their disruption in the industry, and how that all is taking place throughout our life. I wanted to bring a point across about Uber, how Uber back in early 2019 incorporated a way to cannibalize their own business as part of their master plan going forward. So initially they introduced the the UberX rides, which really kind of started disrupting their black car service. And now they're looking at bikes, scooters, they're doing food delivery, trucking, and all of this. Like last year, they bought jump bikes. So they're making all these efforts to continually disrupt themselves. That's really a visionary thing for a company not to get so comfortable in where it's at, but to actively push itself into the future. And so that takes us to WordPress. How is WordPress disrupting itself? We're all part of this community. How are we contributing to the disruption of WordPress? This is a graph of the top 1,000,000 websites that are using WordPress, top 100,000, top 10,000, and all these sites. Like looking at this growth, I would imagine one would think this is fantastic. WordPress is in a solid place right now in the industry. Our market share is great. Why would we want to disrupt this? Why would we want to make a decision that might cause these stats to take a hit, possibly, right? And that ultimately leads to this quote about the fear of making wrong choices leads some companies to strategic paralysis. Companies tend to get so comfortable with where they are that they don't make the disruption happen within their own business to push them into the future, and thus they get disrupted by someone else that comes along. So how can we actively disrupt ourselves? It takes visionaries. And luckily for us, the project lead co-founder of WordPress is a visionary. He's been imagining a disruption for a while now. Back in 2015, he was talking about how it is one of the most difficult things to do is to disrupt yourself in technology. And through that, he was pushing forward. He was introducing and talking about Calypso, which was a redesign of WordPress, of the WordPress admin that WordPress.com uses. And so while some might look at that graph and say, we're in a solid place, I'm going to take a break and just let it and just ride this. The visionaries of WordPress are saying it's time for disruption. And we saw this happen with Gutenberg. Gutenberg came along, and it was an active effort to disrupt WordPress in a good way that could bring benefits to people, help make WordPress better, more usable, and give everybody an opportunity to share their voice in the world. And so that brings me to the 4 principles of self-disruption. Talking about this, we can break it down into some principles and kind of show how these principles applied to Gutenberg. So we have 1, which is to target a need that can be met more effectively. Finding this need that people have, WordPress is already solving a need, right? But if we were to disrupt it, are there other needs that need to be addressed at this time that we can meet in an effective way? Identifying our disruptive strengths. So what are the skills that we have as the people behind WordPress that can be work together in such a way that we can really push forward that disruption or push forward a product that is better and more accessible? Number 3 is to kind of step back or sideways from in order to grow. And this is, we're all kind of on this path. We see these incremental changes happening, this release cycle of 3 releases a year. And little by little, we're just kind of trucking away, improving WordPress and making the changes needed to keep it going. But can we take a step out of that routine and envision something completely different, something that will, as mentioned, disrupt it? So this has been done. There was a sidestep and a vision to disrupt it with Gutenberg, a block-based editor. Number 4 is, once we make that choice, let that strategy kind of emerge and take shape. We can't plan this whole thing out. This is innovation that's happening. So we can't like have everything defined beautifully on a roadmap for everyone. It's kind of a cycle. As we go and improve and get feedback from everybody in the community, we can implement this feedback and keep iterating and moving forward. So talking about number 1, that need that needs to be met more effectively. We saw there was a need for a more versatile content management system. This was evident in the amount of other CMSs that were gaining popularity. We saw a growth in page builders happening in the ecosystem and closed platforms that were rising. So taking a look at all this common trend that was happening throughout the years, how can we position WordPress in a place to meet those needs and excel even further, especially in a way to keep the web open, using open source software? Another need that was very obvious, especially for new users and anybody who's helping new users build a website, is this need to unify the interfaces within WordPress. Right back then, there was we had the editor, you had the customizer, WP admin, widgets, and even plugins had their own interfaces. And so for a new user to jump in and start building a website, it was very, they struggled often. I had an opportunity to partake with Rebrand Cities on a couple events where their goal is to really bring small businesses online, bring their business to have a web presence. And so we'd sit down with business owners, and that's where I got to talk with Joe at WordCamp Santa Clarita a little bit as well. And you help these small businesses build a website, and they get in there, they get into WordPress, and they don't realize, the difference between customizer and the editor and the WP admin, or the amount of like plugin interfaces that they need to go through to get their site doing what it needs to do. And so that's a definite need that needed to be addressed. Number 2, the identifying of our disruptive strengths. JavaScript was fully adopted by this time. It was sweeping the internet. Libraries were being built on top of it, and it had established itself as a solid coding language that was capable of amazing things. This was an obvious path to go to really incorporate and utilize JavaScript more in the software than what we were currently doing. And like I mentioned before, there was the Calypso project on WordPress.com. There was a lot of learning gained from that. Calypso was using APIs and redesigned the WP admin in a way that helped the user identify things a little easier, unified the interfaces. So we were learning from some of this stuff. It was done in the open on GitHub. Number 3 is stepping back or sideways in order to grow. This really can be a challenge, but Calypso was kind of like that fresh look at WP admin. And so knowing that there was an API, how can we take advantage of the API using JavaScript and build a better experience in the software? And of course, Git and GitHub were, I believe, a big factor in Gutenberg's success. It allowed more contributors to really get involved in ways that wasn't easily done in SVN or Track. And so number 4 is letting that strategy emerge, as I mentioned. And if anybody's familiar with reading through some of the documentation about Gutenberg, you'll have noticed that there's in the vision section, there's some basic principles that kind of, or tactics that kind of supported the overall strategy of Gutenberg. These things were, everything in WordPress becomes a block, right? All blocks are equal. Drag and drop is a secondary option. Placeholders and blocks are key to help identify what the user needs to do to make that block functional. Direct manipulation is intuitive, so we wanted the user to be able to interact with that block and whether it's layout or content right in the page and not necessarily have to go elsewhere in WP admin. And code editing shouldn't be necessary for customization. That's a big one. We wanted to give them that ability to have a versatile content management system and be able to customize this and make it their own without having to do a lot of code, or any, if possible. So phase 1 of Gutenberg came out. It was to create a new block-based editor, and it was merged into Core. Once that was accomplished, we identified 3 other phases, and we're currently in phase 2, pushing Gutenberg beyond the editor. And this has recently evolved into what we're calling full site editing, basically. So all of last year was spent, we were tightening up the interface, we're improving the blocks, improving the design and the experience for users who come into Gutenberg. And now we're extending that to become a full site editor, so that you're not only just editing your content, but you can edit your templates, you can edit your patterns, your website, you can build it within Gutenberg itself. As this phase will come to a close, hopefully by the end of this year, we'll kind of have something merged into Core. Phase 3 will become a focus, and that's about collaboration and multi-user editing. So if you can envision like Google Docs, where multiple users can edit the content together, leave comments, this is kind of that phase 3 of what can be done in WordPress. And then finally, phase 4 is about official multilingual site support, which is a huge benefit for for the globe, for all countries, all languages, to really get involved in that. And so despite all the mojo, the bad mojo, right? Like, there's been a lot. We can see that just looking at Gutenberg's reviews in the plugin directory. Despite that, why do we love WordPress? There was a study done in early 2019, a site building study. It was led by Sarah Seamark and Sarah James. And the number one answer to this question was extensibility. The ability to extend WordPress in such a way that it works for the particular users. And with that, in WordPress, we saw why that was the number one answer. We have the CLI, the API. We have plugins and themes, shortcodes, custom post type, widgets, There's just a variety of ways to really extend WordPress. And now with Gutenberg, we have blocks. And as blocks are becoming more popular and the typical way to interact, they're taking over widgets. They're removing the need for shortcodes. We've blocked templates as people build templates within Gutenberg in the full site editing experience. And these, in conjunction with custom post types, really enable a beautiful experience. Global styles are a thing that's being talked about right now. And they're so close to merging in, at least the iteration 1 of global styles. These, in conjunction with themes, are going to give that customization ability to users without having to code. So these include things like line height, font families, and scalability, colors, all this stuff. And we have block patterns, which, if anyone's following, Gutenberg 7.9 was released this last Wednesday, and it introduced block patterns, but now in the inserter. So there's a unified way to add either blocks or patterns of blocks to your page now from one single interface. And ultimately, when we see all this stuff together, we notice that WordPress's extensibility is refreshed. It's getting a little bit of an overhaul, I guess, or a revamping of how WordPress can be extended. It's meeting that need or that desire of people that want that ability to extend WordPress and customize it the way that they want. So all that in conjunction with the modern JS libraries like React, Git, and GitHub just really opens up a beautiful opportunity for people and a beautiful way to innovate within WordPress. So I wanted to bring this back to Gutenberg, right? Like we talked about disruptive innovation and what that's about. How does Gutenberg fit in with that? So with Gutenberg, we've redefined editing and layout using blocks. And this is attracting more site builders today. In fact, when Gutenberg was merged into Core, that year saw 5% market share growth in WordPress alone. And that was the largest growth in market share year over year that WordPress has seen. With Gutenberg, we've introduced modern code, and this is attracting new developers. WordPress 5.4 just released at the end of March, and it included 153 Gutenberg contributors. Not all of them were developers, but a good chunk of them were. And they're learning, a lot of them are learning how to develop with React, how to use these new libraries right there in the software. And with Gutenberg, we have provided an easier, more adoptable version control and repo system. This is attracting more contributors overall. And WordPress 5.4 included 519 contributors. 32% of those, a third of those contributors, were first-time contributors. Now, these numbers don't all relate to Gutenberg, but they're significant. That's a large number of people diving into this software, into this project, especially first-time contributors. And so essentially, we've attracted more site builders, new developers, more contributors, and all of this is just really benefiting the ecosystem right now. It's seeing a breath of new air coming in and starting to thrive and starting to pick up. And I believe it's going to grow. It's really going to just get better as the software improves, as full site editing becomes a thing. I can't wait to really see like the outcome of this. And it took visionaries to not be afraid of strategic paralysis, but to really take a chance and bet on something that could help disrupt WordPress. So this isn't a breakthrough innovation to say. It's a disruptive innovation, and it's making WordPress more affordable and accessible. But how is it affordable? What do you mean affordable? WordPress is free, right? I mean affordable that people will afford to spend their time contributing to something like this, especially those who desire to learn the new coding languages that are out there. Those people who want to learn React, they can do it in WordPress now. They can do it as part of our community. And when I say accessible, there have been leaps and bounds of improvements for accessibility in Gutenberg alone. It has become one of the most accessible editors out there, if not the most accessible. It's fantastic, and features are always being implemented to help, whether it's keyboard navigation or various other accessibility like device assistive technologies. It's really beneficial for those. And on top of that, when I say accessible too, I mean people can get involved with Gutenberg through GitHub, right? Without having to struggle through the track and SVN and that whole system. So all of this is happening based on something called disruptive innovation. I'm encouraging you all to come and join us and to be a part of this, because it's changing WordPress right now, and it's creating a new refreshed ecosystem out there. People are designing and building blocks and block patterns, and innovation is just like creeping back into WordPress tenfold right now because of the possibilities. So please come and partake with us. Give us your feedback. Join us in the decision process, which is all public, to really drive forward WordPress into the future. And with that, I want to say thank you so much, everyone, for attending the talk and joining us all today at WordCamp Santa Clarita online. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer anything or get back to anything.
Any questions, anybody yet? No? Okay. I do, there's a couple of questions that came in, a couple of comments too. Chris says, number of contributors, the new contributors number is a useful one, but perhaps more useful is the number of those who stay and contribute again. What are those year-over-year return numbers for that group of new contributors?
So what's the year-over-year number for returning contributors?
Yes.
I don't have that number, but basically it's the other percentage of that number. So what is that, 64% or 66% of people who are coming back to continue contributing? That is definitely concern, because you want those longtime contributors to come back and to continually bring their experience and their wisdom and their knowledge back to the project. I think right now is a great opportunity for that. And we're seeing that happen with even some of the older long-term contributors that we've had for a while. They're returning right now with a little more desire to partake in this and to help WordPress grow. So I think it's a positive thing that's happening, and we're going to see that continued throughout.
There is another question. How can the Gutenberg project improve accessibility before a new release comes out?
How can the Gutenberg project improve accessibility before a new release?
Yes, and he says, so we're not surprised by change.
Fair, that's fair. So, of course, attending the accessibility meetings, in the community is a great way, and then communicating what's being talked about there back to the developers or the designers, the people who are actually trying to build Gutenberg, is one aspect of this. Joining the meetings in Slack, those are always helpful. And when we have people on the accessibility team or more people with more accessibility knowledge than the rest of us come in and identify issues, is very beneficial for us. And if there's any question about how what's being done, what are the latest things being worked on. We're really trying to communicate that so that everybody's aware of what the next things are. There's a continual monthly post that goes out highlighting our focuses. I post regularly on the Make Design blog every Friday about what the design team is working on that week. And so if you're curious from an accessibility standpoint, drop in on some of those posts. I'm happy. Connect with me, DM me on Slack or Twitter, and I'll help you identify how to be more proactive and making sure that what's coming out or what's coming down the line is accessible, because that's a very, very good question and a very important one.
Well, looks like we have a bunch of time for questions, which is good because they're coming. Let me see. Somebody's asking, how come there's no section block currently in Gutenberg? I know the group block essentially is a section, but it doesn't generate a section tag. I guess that's more of a technical question, but
no, it's a valid one. And I've seen like a lot of good questions about this lately as well. Is like, why can't we have a block that then implements the section tag, right, in HTML, rather than using the group block, which is using divs? So I get that concern, and I'm hoping like that we can really work towards something, especially with block patterns as being a thing. I love the concept that one of the things that we hear about all the time from users is how do I make my website like the demo, right? You get a demo, a theme demo, but people don't know how to make their website look like that. So block patterns are like a way for users to do this. If themes introduce their own block pattern into Gutenberg, the user is going to be able to just pull a chunk of those patterns, drop it right into their page. And it would be ideal if those patterns or those blocks were contained in a beautiful section using section tags. I think that's a great question. And I know there's ongoing discussion about this. So if that's something you're passionate about and you care about, like, please join us. If you're happy to jump in, if you feel comfortable jumping in with the code, we would love to have your idea on how this might get implemented. Yeah.
There's another question from Kevin. How do you advocate for disruptions with stakeholders who are cautious about negatively impacting business?
This is a big concern, and we saw this as well in a lot of like the site building study that was done earlier. I talked about, we did a lot of usability tests or questioning and talking with users. They have very specific flows in WordPress, right? They've got it all dialed in. They know the flow that they need to do to set someone up with a website or to set up a business, right? And so when you introduce Gutenberg, it throws things off, and it is very difficult to communicate that with stakeholders sometimes. Talking about the benefits, talking about the future, the experience that Gutenberg brings. I think sharing case studies where people have turned to Gutenberg in a positive way and really found the benefit therein. I noticed myself, sometimes the best way to communicate this change as a positive thing is to really show like a side-by-side comparison. I'm building a page on the site, and I need to get this content in there. This is how long it took me to do in the classic editor. This is the struggle I went through trying to get this layout in the classic editor. In Gutenberg, this is the time I saved. It took me a fraction of the time to get the layout that I wanted and present the content in a way that I wanted. So sometimes just making that comparison helps communicate it to stakeholders. I hope that helps.
This one is not exactly a question, but there's a couple of comments that come to the same thing.
I love comments.
Brian said, Gutenberg has allowed me to offload content creation to employees outside of the IT department at my day job at a level that wasn't possible with the old editor. So somebody who's saying, hey, exactly. It's like,
that touches me right there. It's a good comment. Thank you.
Yeah. And then Joseph made a couple of comments about the negative reviews of WordPress and how he says it's kind of Yelp for WordPress. It's a very narrow audience. But I mean, I know it's a thing that there's people who are reclutant, like they don't want this change or it doesn't work for them. What do you, as a Gutenberg developer, or what's the officially, like, or even you, what do you tell those people? Like, what do you tell them when people don't want to switch? How do you ease their concerns, or how do you tell them, hey, this is what you should be doing? Basically, what's your comment for them?
So really, I really try to get to know the person first, and I try to understand their experience and why the struggle is happening for them, and then I can really address maybe the problem or help them see maybe some of the benefits with Gutenberg. So it's really all about getting to know that person, and this is a continual thing that we do in the community, especially with people who have a problem with it. We're continually working with them as best we can to find the right solution that meets their needs that they're looking for. And we see this in the forums, those reviews you were talking about. Yeah, it's definitely a small group of people that are kind of want to voice that negativity. But when we respond to like honest questions that people have in the forums, they're really brought on board a lot better. And so it's just a matter of communication, really, which is a big part of what I do now, is communicate these things.
I have a question. I mean, this is one of mine, and it's maybe a little more technical, but you were talking that everything's going to be a block now. So basically, every WordPress settings, and I know that right now Gutenberg saves the post. I'm going to say post as any type of post data inside the post. How is that going to work on the technically for any other content, like for example, site settings and stuff that right now is saved in the database and not inside the post? How is that going to change?
So what I don't like, maybe the miscommunication I kind of see happening right now is that everything on the website itself is kind of becomes a block, right? So whether it's the header, the navigation, the footer, the link, like everything in that aspect is kind of a block. Like the settings in WP admin probably won't necessarily be blocks themselves. Those will still be a list of settings that are stored in the database. But everything that a user would interact with when laying out the site really becomes a block in that sense. Is that answer?
Yeah, that's, I mean, okay. I figure, but I also wanted to put it out there. I have another question here. Are patterns ever going to get categories so we can organize them and not having to deal with a hot mess of hundreds of patterns in one place?
Yes, no one wants a hot mess. So there are there's an issue in GitHub right now talking about the categories of patterns and how we can help group those in ways that make cognitive sense to people and users without using like weird technology terms. So good question. We're looking at that right now.
And I have a very hot question from William. How long did it take to grow a beard of that length?
Yes. I need the beard question. Those are pretty cool. It took me, over a year. I've had this beard though for over 13 years. Like it is now a part of who I am. And yeah, so if you see me or the beard, like come say hi. I'd love to talk. And yeah.
Okay, let me see. I think that's it for questions. I don't think anything else is coming.
Well, if nothing else comes, I do want to say, like, for everybody out there, please feel free to communicate with me, to talk to me. I'm open to messages, ping me on Slack and Twitter, whatever. I really enjoy communicating with the users of WordPress and the community as a whole. So,
yeah, and I was gonna say, if there's anything else, we have a little time, but if that's it, yeah, I guess that's nothing else coming. So thank you so much, Mark. That was really great. I know a lot of people are like thinking what's next with Gutenberg, what's going to be, because it's going to be the future of WordPress. So yeah, thank you so much.
Just to add one thing to add there is the Gutenberg Changelog podcast is a great way to stay up to date on what's being released in the Gutenberg plugin, and make sure you have that plugin activated as well. You get the first insight to the cool stuff coming out. So thank you so much. I appreciate it, everybody.
Okay, thanks everyone for joining us, and we can probably catch Mark later at the winner's circle. That's going to be open at the lunch break. And please join us for the next meetings throughout the day, because there's going to be a lot of good things coming.